This is ERS. This is the good stuff. Elite recipe source, breaking out another dank recipe from the old stash, doing samosas here, 100% homemade from scratch and just about as authentic as you can get in a home recipe. Hello and welcome to ERS number 3, the third video of the channel and the first video of the new playlist I'm putting together on the topic of fusion cuisine. So, samosas. Why samosas? Well, reason number one, of course, is that they're really freaking good, especially when they're homemade and fresh out of the frying pan. And reason number two is that the samosa can be a building block that you can use to construct other new and unique fusion dishes that use different elements of different food cultures. When I think of really good examples of fusion cuisine, I think of a meat and or vegetable filling from one food culture being wrapped up in the bready or doughy container of another, like a banh mi sandwich or a Korean taco being a couple of examples. So the samosa, I'm thinking, best fits the category of the outer bready wrapper that later on in another video I do plan on using in a fusion cuisine dish. But for this video, I'm doing a basic Indian style traditional version. This is because the most important rule in fusion cuisine in combining two or more dishes into one new dish is that you should at least know how to make the original versions fairly well first before moving on and trying to use it in something new and original. Alright then, let's get down to the nitty gritty of what you'll need to have to make a proper samosa. This here is what you'll need to have ready for the dough. 2 1/4 cup of flour, 3 tablespoons of clarified butter or ghee, which is basically like a clarified butter, only it's been taken a little further on the stove and it's got a little more of a nuttier flavor because it's been browned a little more. Or you can just use oil for this. So salt, this I used about an 1/8 teaspoon, maybe a little less. One important note on this is to try to remember to add the salt first to the mixing bowl. It's easy to overlook and you don't want to realize too late that you forgot to add the salt. Like once you've made the dough ball or wrapped the samosa or started frying them, just get it in the mixing bowl first, get it out of the way. And then finally, there's the water. I'm saying here to have about 3/4 cup ready to go, but you may only end up using a 1/2 cup. This is going to be a very dry and tough dough, and it needs to be that way in order to get the crispy, bubbly exterior that a proper samosa has. And so I'll get more into this this point in the procedure when I show the video. So once you've got these things on hand for the dough, this here is what you're going to need for the filling. And so you can just pause here and check your refrigerator, your freezer, and your pantry and make sure you have everything you need so far as ingredients goes in order to proceed on here. Now you probably don't have this stuff in the right hand column called asafoetida. I was able to get some, so I'm using it. If you don't have it, no worries, you can still make a really good samosa without it. Its flavor is most similar to garlic. So just compensate with a couple more cloves of garlic if you don't have it. And a lot of this is going to be to taste. You're going to be tasting this stuff as you make it. And so I'm suggesting to have the last 4 ingredients, garam masala, ground cumin, garlic powder, and salt, just ready on standby to add as needed. So the most time efficient way to do these samosas is to start with putting together the dough first. I've got my tools and ingredients out here for that, and I've got my clarified butter portioned out in the pan. I take that over to the stove just to get it melted. I set the melted butter next to my other dough ingredients and start assembling the dough, going with the salt in there first. Then comes the flour and then the melted clarified butter. Once that butter hits the cold flour, it's going to go to a softened butter consistency, and I can pretty easily break it up into really small clumps and work it into the flour. Then I'm going to start adding room temperature water just a little at a time and kneading it a minute, then seeing if it could use a little more water, then adding a little more water, and then mixing and kneading it, and so on. And so what you're going to end up with here is a rough, shaggy kind of dough, not something smooth. Like I said, with the water, I was in the ballpark of only about a 1/2 cup or so. Now, I know the dough looks like something that would be impossible to roll out and make shapes with now, and it is, but this is what it's supposed to look like at this stage. And this is why we're going to let it sit covered for at least 2 hours. And that is why we started with the dough first. So While we wait for the dough to rest and soften up, now is the time to start prepping the ingredients for the filling. So let's start the prep work on the filling with the fresh produce ingredients. We got a couple onions, the potatoes, those are russets, the garlic cloves, fresh ginger, a hot chili pepper, in my case it's a serrano, and the green leafy stuff, that is cilantro, or if there's any British folks watching out there, y'all would know this stuff as, and I'm gonna try to get this pronunciation right, y'all call this stuff coriander. So I'll peel the potatoes and do a medium dice on them. I put the diced potato into water to keep it from browning, but I'm not gonna boil the potatoes as some recipes will call for. I'm gonna do all the cooking of the potatoes and all the other filling ingredients in the same pot because I prefer my samosa filling to be fairly chunky, like a chunky potato salad kind of. What I don't want is a samosa that's got more of a mashed potato type filling. I wanna get mostly chunks when I bite into it, not mashed potatoes oozing out. All right, so next I'm gonna peel a little nub of this ginger and grate it, only about a teaspoon or so. I'm not a big ginger fan, and plus there's dry ginger powder in the garam masala mix that I'm gonna use later anyway. So I'll put the grated ginger into a cup and I'll move on to the garlic, smash the garlic peels off and then take off the little brown stemmy things at the top and do my best to get out the green kind of shoot thing from in the middle. I'll give them a fine dice and then with a little coarse salt, scrape this into a paste and then into the cup it goes along with the ginger. I'll fine dice the serrano pepper, removing most of the seeds and stems. I'm not doing a heat fest here, but if that's what you want to do, you can go ahead and leave the ribs and seeds in there. And then so the diced pepper, it goes into the cup there as well. So I'll chop the cilantro and rinse it and dry it. Then I'll dice the onion. So now that I've got all this vegetable prep done and all this video editing out of the way, I can use this as my own stock footage for future videos. But for now, I've got the chopped vegetables ready to go for when the time comes. And that time is coming up soon, but not before I get my spices ready. I go ahead and take off the tops of the containers of the cumin seed and that ground turmeric so they'll be ready to go into the hot pot. I got my garam masala mix opened up here and ready to go. And with the asafoetida, that stuff came in like a crystalline kind of cube. So I had to shave some of the grit and the little shards off of it and get that set up in a paper plate. With the asafoetida, you also have to make sure you seal up the unused portion really airtight. Otherwise, the flavor will evaporate out. So I got everything for the filling set up, opened up, chopped up, whatever I need to have it ready to go. I have some oil in a hot pan, and here we go with it. First in is the cumin. Then the turmeric. And the asafoetida. These spices need a little time to fry a little first before we go further. Then in goes the onion. Cook that up a little bit. Then the potato goes in. And I'm straining it out of the bowl of water that it was sitting in, putting it in fairly dry. Then I put in a handful of the cilantro, just a handful, and all of the contents of that cup. That is the ginger, the garlic, and the serrano. So it's just a matter of cooking and tasting at this point. I'm adding the rest of the cilantro, I'm adding a little salt, and I'm tasting, and I'm adding a little ground cumin, I'm tasting, and I'm adding a little more garam masala, and I'm tasting, and I'm also tasting the potatoes for doneness. And once the potatoes are cooked almost all the way through, when I can bite in and I can feel there's still just a little bit of the potato in the middle that's not quite completely soft, then it's time to add the peas. Those aren't going to take too long to cook at all. And so far as the flavor is concerned, it should be smelling and tasting pretty good by now. Just keep seasoning until it gets to where you can't resist but to take another bite. The peas shouldn't take very long. They're almost done. Maybe a minute or two. And remember, everything's going to be recooked again when we fry the samosas. So this mix can be a little on the undercooked side at this point. So the filling mix is cooled down and the dough is rested and softened up, and it's time to begin the final assembly. How I find it the best way to do these is with the recipe's proportions, I know I'm going to be making 8 samosas. So I'll divide my filling mix into 8 sections with a bench scraper like so. Then I'll divide the dough ball into 4 balls. I'll roll one of these out as round as I can to a thickness of about less than 1/8 inch and a width a little wider than my hand. I'll cut the circle in half, giving me 2 semicircles, and so each semicircle is going to be 1 samosa. Now I'm going to, with a little water on my finger, wet the outside to help the edges stick when I start folding, kind of like how you do with a ravioli or a calzone. But with these, I'm going to be doing all the shaping. It's all going to be done in the hands and up off of the work surface. You're going to be making an ice cream cone kind of shape by folding the straight edges together. I'll have a finger inside the cone so I can push the seams together from the inside as well as from the outside. Once you get your ice cream cone, you fill it with your samosa mix, careful not to overfill it. This recipe makes a little extra filling even when factoring in a lot of tasting and snacking, which is going to be pretty hard to resist doing with this stuff. One tip, something I learned doing these, is that it's good to put a smaller spoonful of filling in first so it can fill into the bottom of that ice cream cone shape first before filling in the fatter top with a larger spoonful. Once you've got a full cone with plenty of extra dough around the top, you're gonna pinch it all together, making that triangular samosa shape. The first 1 or 2 may be a little awkward, and as you can see, this recipe is labor and time intensive. But by the time I got to making the 4th samosa here, I'd really gotten the hang of it, and once I found that groove in making them, my senses, and especially my sense of smell, started putting together and appreciating what was about to happen. I got a second win so far as motivation, and the end of the journey was in sight. I used a couple of non-stick pans to set these samosas in like this, and unfortunately there is still going to be a little wait time. These guys are going to have to sit out for about 15 minutes to dry out a little. What you want is to have a kind of a skin on the outside. That way you get that crispy, bubbly exterior when they get fried. And mine here were a little on the wet and sticky side, especially on the bottom part that was coming into contact with the pan. So I flipped them and gave them a very light coating of flour and cornstarch to dry them out a little more before putting them into the hot oil. And in some spots on these, I could see a few peas almost wanting to poke through the dough, and I was a little worried that I might have some bursting going on, but I was pleasantly surprised that all 8 of these held their shape perfectly, and 100% of the filling remained in the samosas. Now, for the fry procedure, I have the oil between about 320 and 350, and I'm cooking these for about 15 minutes or until golden brown like this. I'm landing them on a wire rack and letting them sit and cool for about at least 5 minutes before biting into them. They're going to be really hot. Now, I've done these before with a cilantro yogurt sauce, which was great, but honestly, these samosas here don't even need a sauce. Now, these samosas are best when they're fresh and crispy right out the frying pan. But if you've got leftover samosas, what you can do is put them in the fridge and the next day take a couple to work for lunch and reheat them in the break room's microwave or toaster oven. And when your coworkers get a whiff of it, they will be impressed and they'll ask, "Where'd you get such awesome Indian food at?" And you can tell them, "I made it myself and I learned how to do it from a YouTube channel called Elite Recipe Source."